I'm Mhairi here from National Museum Scotland. I'm presenting on an object made of whisky waste, very Scottish, and a kind of traditional object collecting, but also a new commission made with a contemporary designer. And I love the word technofossil. I'll come to that later. This is part of our contemporary collecting programme. We have a really active contemporary collecting working group here at National Museum Scotland. And one of our major priorities at the moment is to collect objects which tell compelling stories related to climate change and the climate emergency in Scotland and, of course, Scotland and the world. And so this is part of that. So this is a draff, ashet, which is a Scottish word for a serving tray, made of repurposed, in fact, I'm just going to click because you'll see our latest. Do I press that? Yes, that's a more up-to-date image, hot off the press today, in fact, of the finished object. But this is a serving tray made of repurposed copper still offcuts from a traditional whisky still manufacturer called Macmillan Coppersmiths and Fabricators Limited. But also most interestingly, this base, the main surface of the tray is made using organic distilling whisky waste, which is sourced from a sustainable distillery up in the northeast of Scotland. And it was made by the designer Aymeric Renault, who has a studio called Draff, and he's based in Dundee. And it was made based on a design that he's already producing and is already available on the market. And Aymeric's work is really rooted in a sense of place and a sense of storytelling. And this object made from him, of whisky waste, tells a significant story of how Scotland is adapting to climate change. And as I mentioned, ashet is the traditional word, Scots word for a large serving dish. And this would be used to serve fine foods and drinks to guests. But this takes this idea a step further, and in fact it involves the raw kind of drink materials, so to speak. You can almost sniff and taste the draft material that he's used, the surface that he's made this object from, as I'll show, because he uses the waste from whisky distilling and production. So the surface he creates has this lovely sensual quality to it. Is that clicking through? Hold on. If I just click next, there we go. So draff is the Scottish word for the spent grains and husks that are left over from whisky distilling. And usually distilleries don't really know what to do with that waste material. It often ends up as cattle feed or just in landfill. It's actually a problem. What to do with the draff is a problem, and an increasing problem with the boom in whisky production and industry. And our collections here at National Museum of Scotland, of course, chart a long history in Scotland of 400 years of whisky production, really, from illicit distilling through to the boom in production in the 19th and 20th centuries, where it became kind of an icon of Scotland, one of the most successful global exports, perhaps symbolizing a kind of pristine landscape, because of course whisky uses the raw materials of cereals and water. Kind of it's extracting these raw materials from the Scottish landscape, and it's always branding around whisky often plays to that idea of this pristine, untainted Scottish landscape. But in reality, it is actually one of the most polluters, most prolific polluters and causes of waste in Scotland, this industry. So Aymeric wanted to work with our Beaky distillery. I mentioned that he sourced the materials he used from a distillery in northeast Scotland. Well, our Beaky distillery claim to be and are aiming to be one of the world's most sustainable small-scale whisky producers. And they're reintroducing barley breeds that had fallen out of use because they weren't producing enough they weren't productive enough for mass production, but rather were better on a small scale kind of agricultural farming distillery model. So Arbiki are revisiting that, but actually by reintroducing species like thyme barley, they have found that this species is more hardy to climate change and actually is beneficial for the long seasons that we now have. So yeah, it's retrotyping, another word I like to use, but this looking to the past to inform contemporary innovation. Yeah, Arbiki are really interested in looking up past whiskey recipes and reintroducing them. So Amric approached Arbiki and sourced his draft, the spent grains from there, and then he cleverly hot presses this with a kind of biodegradable resin and makes this beautiful surface material. So that's really the main body of this object. And there's Arbiki. It's in a beautiful location. Kirsty Black is the master distiller there. She's one of the only female master distillers also working in Scotland today. I'll share this on chat, but we've got a wee little film, which also shows more about the copper rim, which went into the making of this tray. The other thing that I think is quite interesting to note is that this object really celebrates also traditional knowledge and handcraft, which goes into our beloved dram. But collecting objects which also talk about sustainability and the networks and communities of making that are involved in the supply chains as well is quite hard to do. But I think this object's really successful at pulling together the people and the places that are involved in the whiskey industry and that story. And I think it's also a really compelling story, as I mentioned, about looking to the past to solve the challenges of our age. And you mentioned the word technofossil. Well, I see that idea of how do we sustainably collect these stories in museums? How do we fossilize these more intangible challenges like climate, like the organic waste that we produce? And how do we find clever ways, perhaps working with creative practitioners and designers to tell those stories? So I hope this actually poses questions as well.